What if everything you thought you knew was only the beginning? A journey lies ahead where time bends, secrets awaken, and every step could change everything. Are you ready to see the world like never before? Before Rome, there was mist, an island wrapped in cold winds and restless seas. Dense forests stretched across the hills, rivers cut through untouched valleys, and tribal kingdoms ruled the land. To the Mediterranean world, Britannia was a rumor, a distant place beyond the horizon, a land of tin, warriors, and endless rain. When Roman ships first appeared in 43 AD under Emperor Claudius, they did not arrive as explorers. They arrived as conquerors. Legions stepped onto unfamiliar soil. Metal armor clashed against painted warriors. Hill forts burned under disciplined formations. But conquest alone does not build an empire. Occupation does. Rome did not merely defeat Britain, it remade it. Roads were carved through forests with geometric precision, straight lines across a wild landscape. Stone replaced timber. Latin replaced tribal dialects in marketplaces and courts. Within decades, something extraordinary emerged, a Roman province at the edge of the known world. In Londinium, merchants traded wine from Gaul and olive oil from Spain. In Eboracum, soldiers guarded the north. In Aquae Sulis, steam rose from sacred baths dedicated to Sulis Minerva. Imagine it, warm water flowing through carved stone pools, while beyond the city walls, cold rain fell across green hills. Roman Britain was not a frontier outpost, it was civilization. Villas spread across the countryside, mosaics beneath their floors, painted walls, heated rooms through hypocaust systems. Merchants counted coins stamped with emperors who ruled from thousands of miles away. For nearly 4 centuries, Britain endured as Rome's northern jewel. But empires, even at their height, carry seeds of fragility. And far beyond the island, the empire was beginning to tremble. The 3rd century brought instability not only to Britain, but to Rome itself. Emperors rose and fell in rapid succession. Armies declared loyalty to whoever promised power. Civil war became a pattern. Plague moved silently across trade routes. Climate shifts disrupted harvests. Borders stretched too thin. Britain felt the strain. Though distant from Rome, it was deeply connected to its lifeline. Ships brought grain. Officials collected taxes. Orders came from the imperial center. But when Rome weakened, the edges felt it first. On the northern frontier, Hadrian's wall stood as a symbol of control, a stone barrier dividing empire from chaos. Beyond it lived the Picts. To the west, Irish raiders crossed the sea. To the east, Saxon ships began appearing along the coastline. At first, these were raids, quick, violent, temporary, but over time they became something else, persistent. Britain required soldiers to defend it, yet Rome required soldiers everywhere. Legions stationed in Britain were sometimes withdrawn, not to defend the island, but to fight Rome's own internal wars. Each withdrawal left the province exposed. And then came usurpation. In 383 AD, the general Magnus Maximus was declared emperor by troops in Britain. He crossed to Gaul, taking much of the island's military strength with him. Britain was not simply attacked from outside, it was hollowed from within. Towns that once thrived on imperial funding began to struggle. Coin circulation slowed. Public buildings were no longer repaired with the same urgency. The machinery of empire requires constant maintenance. When that maintenance falters, decay begins. By the early 5th century, the pressure became unbearable.
Raids intensified. Local leaders pleaded for reinforcements. And then, in 410 AD, a message arrived. A letter from Emperor Honorius. Britain must look to its own defense. Rome could no longer protect it. 4 centuries of imperial rule ended not with an explosion, but with abandonment. No grand farewell, no final battle, just silence.
The legions did not return. No banners appeared on the horizon. No reinforcements came marching up the Roman roads. Instead, there was quiet. At first, life continued as it always had. Markets opened, fields were plowed, children played in stone courtyards. But something invisible had changed. Without imperial engineers, the great systems of Roman Britain began to fail. Aqueducts cracked, bathhouses cooled, public fountains stopped flowing. The machinery of civilization is delicate. It requires maintenance, order, and belief. When those disappear, stone alone cannot hold it together. In towns like Londinium and Verulium, buildings once repaired by imperial funds were left untouched. Roofs sagged, timbers rotted, mosaics were covered by dirt and debris. Coins, once symbols of Rome's authority, became scarce. Trade routes weakened. Ships from the Mediterranean stopped arriving. The island grew quieter. Archaeologists would later uncover strange layers in the soil, evidence not of one great destruction, but of gradual abandonment. Houses subdivided into smaller living spaces, grand halls converted into workshops, public forums used for grazing animals. The transformation was not dramatic, it was slow, almost invisible. And then, in some places, came fire. Not the organized burning of invasion, but chaotic destruction. Perhaps raiders, perhaps civil unrest, perhaps desperate communities fighting over dwindling resources. We cannot know for certain, but in the ruins of one Roman town, centuries later, a poem was found, written in Old English. It spoke not of emperors or politics, but of awe. The work of giants is decayed. To those who came after, the towering stone walls and bathhouses seemed beyond human ability. Surely only giants could have built such things. The memory of Rome had already faded into legend. Children growing up in 5th century Britain no longer knew the empire. They knew only the ruins. Cold stone arches standing alone in fields, crumbling towers against gray skies, broken statues buried in earth. Roman Britain did not explode, it eroded. The great villas of the countryside tell the story best. Once filled with color, heated floors, and imported wine, they became shelters for animals. Roof tiles collapsed inward, rain seeped through open ceilings. Walls that once displayed painted scenes of gods and heroes became cracked and faded. The elite who had lived Roman lives, speaking Latin, wearing Roman dress, faced a choice: adapt or disappear. Some withdrew westward, into Wales and the rugged highlands. Others blended into emerging local power structures. Some likely maintained fragments of Roman identity in language, law, and memory. But centralized authority was gone. The empire had not fallen in Britain, it had dissolved. Hadrian's wall still stood, but fewer soldiers guarded it. In time, even that frontier was abandoned. Grass grew between its stones. Sheep wandered where legionaries once marched. The silence deepened. And yet, from this quiet decay, something new was forming. Not Roman, not entirely native, but something different. The end of Roman Britain was not merely collapse, it was transformation.
And in the shadow of ruined bathhouses and empty forums, a new England was slowly being born.
Rome was gone, but Britain remained. The roads still cut across the countryside. The walls still stood against the sky. The bathhouses still echoed with emptiness. Yet something had shifted forever. Without imperial rule, power did not vanish. It fragmented. Across the island, local warlords began to rise. Former Roman officials, tribal leaders, men who could command loyalty in uncertain times. The old province did not collapse into darkness overnight. Instead, it splintered into smaller worlds. In the West, Romano-British kingdoms held on to fragments of Roman identity. Latin prayers were still whispered in churches. Christian bishops still gathered where they could. But in the East and South, change arrived by sea. Saxon ships. At first, they came as hired warriors, mercenaries invited to defend the shores against raiders. But history often turns on unintended consequences. Those invited to protect sometimes decide to stay. Small settlements appeared along riverbanks. Wooden halls replaced stone villas. Burial customs changed. Where Roman towns had once stood in geometric order, new communities formed in looser patterns, closer to forests, rivers, and farmland. The language shifted. Latin faded. Old English slowly emerged. And with language, memory changed. The ruins of Roman Britain became mysteries, massive stone structures that no one now alive remembered building. Children growing up beside abandoned bathhouses did not think of emperors, they thought of giants. In Old English poetry, the Roman cities were described with awe. The work of giants is decayed. To the new inhabitants of Britain, Rome was no longer history, it was legend. But not everything disappeared. Roman roads continued to guide travel. City walls became foundations for medieval towns. Christianity endured, quietly, stubbornly. The collapse of Roman Britain was not a clean break. It was layering. Roman foundations, Saxon structures, Christian faith, tribal loyalties. Out of collapse came synthesis. By the 7th century, powerful Anglo-Saxon kingdoms had emerged: Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria. They were not Roman, but they inherited a landscape shaped by Rome. The empire had fallen, yet its shadow remained. When we walk today through England's countryside, when we see straight roads cutting through hills, when we stand before ruined walls, when we uncover mosaics buried beneath fields, we are not witnessing a simple end. We are witnessing transition. The story of Roman Britain is not only about collapse. It is about how civilizations fade, how memory transforms, and how new identities rise from old stone. Empires feel eternal while they last, but even the greatest